look into school books, I realized there was something that was more urgent, and this is the racist way Palestinians are represented. And since I studied semiotics and social semiotics in London, I did a multimodal analysis of the books, which was never done. Even people who wrote about school books never wrote about the whole page, the visuals and the verbal and the relationships between them and so on. So that's how my first book about school books came along. And then I thought that Israeli children are really educated to another Holocaust. This is one of the most defining factors of Israeli identity, the Holocaust, and the fact that the Holocaust is around the corner. And so they start from a very early age teaching the Holocaust. First years, from 3 to 8, they are very cautious not to show gruesome and terrible things. But after that, it's unbelievable what they show them, what they tell them. As one of Holocaust historians said, we only teach them the pornography of evil and that we are victims. So they've no idea what normalcy is. Hanea Blanca. And I decided to study this and to see if there's a connection between the way Holocaust is taught and the way minority groups such as Palestinians and Ethiopians and Arab Jews are represented in school books. And this is my last book.
Okay. So can you give us a couple of examples?
I covered all the aspects of the discourse of education.
Can you give us a couple of examples, both on the verbal, the linguistics, and the semiotics?
Well, the verbal is included in the semiotics because, all the signs are included, all the meaning made by signs. For the Palestinians, for example, but also for the other groups, Israeli identity or Israeliness, I should say, is constituted against several groups. First of all, against the diaspora Jew, who finally perished in the Holocaust. The diaspora Jew is considered weak and without muscles, and really they took the anti-Semitic description of the Jews, effeminate and so on and so forth, studious. And Zionism wanted Jews with muscles. That was the slogan. Jews that would work the land and would use a gun and would master an Arab horse. They wanted to be like the Arabs, like to indigenize themselves in the Middle East. So this is, and one of the most important principles of Zionism is the negation of diaspora. All the life that Jews had for thousands of years in other countries should be effaced, erased, and we are reborn. So for the first socialists like Ben-Gurion and so on, it was fine. They really wanted to negate and deny and forget their history, both the religious background and the social background and the pogroms, etc. And then the people for whom they wanted to found the state, the European Jewry, was exterminated. So they looked for other Jews and they found them in Arab countries. But the Jews from Arab countries did not want to negate their former life because it wasn't that bad. They just had their own reason to come and live in the land of Israel, mostly religious reasons, but also Zionist reasons. And they were forced to give up their language, the customs, the religious customs, their culture, their music, everything. And they have been treated as second, third-class citizens for already 3 generations. Same about Ethiopian Jews. And education, especially after 73, because the failure of 73 made a lot of young people think twice if they want to remain in this country where you die all the time and there's no real life. So the Ministry of Education sought something that would make them stay and convince them they must sacrifice their lives for the state. And this was found in Holocaust education, very massive, intensive Holocaust education. For example, in the teacher's guide for second grade, it says that the Jews were exterminated because they did not have a state. Today we have a state, so we can defend ourselves against the potential exterminators, the Arabs. The conflations of Nazis and Arabs is all the time, not only in political, you probably heard speech, but also in educational speech. Now, Palestinians are represented only if they are. Usually they are not. They're absent. They are absent from Israeli culture, from Israeli discourse, from Israeli consciousness, and from Israeli school books. But if they are represented, they're represented as problems, not as human beings. You don't have, in Israel, school books are trade books, and you have hundreds of books for every subject, and teachers can choose. But you don't find in any of these books one photograph of an Arab human being like us. Only a racist caricature of some kind of Alibaba with a camel, refugees, primitive farmers, and terrorists. So this is the representation of Palestinians. Jewish minorities who are discriminated, such as I told you, Arab Jews and Ethiopians, are also represented as homogeneous groups, not individually. You never see a doctor who is Ethiopian. You never see. As a group, as a homogeneous group, just almost like a race. And the only thing that is said about them is how the state copes with them, with this problem. Okay, they are all problems. And what unites everybody is the Holocaust.
No, it might go back to some of those inaccurate statements that BB was making earlier that get people to say maybe the unwarranted collective punishment of the women and children is not meritorious and should not be supported. But in light of the Hasbara, or as the Nazis called it, Amtssprache, use that official bureaucratic language and all the ethnic cleansing and genocide, it'll just be, you'll forget about it when there's all those new shiny skyscrapers of apartment buildings on the Gaza coast and all these people with their right to return from all over the world that have never set foot there in maybe ever are going to get somebody else's property that has recently been renamed and replumbed and resurveyed. They're going to resurvey it and rename all the cities, and they'll leave no trace behind. So it's only their artifacts you'll find in the future. It's almost like it's been going on for a while, that type of activity. We'll get to the Israeli artifacts later, because there's Israeli artifacts way back in history in that area. There's also Canaanite artifacts. There's a couple other groups that live there too. They might have conquered each other back and forth, but all of a sudden, it's all said and done, and everyone's so sure about it today. It's funny how that works out if you just cut out all the context of these things. What'd you think of those clips, Tony?
I think I'm not surprised, nor was I necessarily unaware of the redefinition of anti-Semitism. So, but at the same time, one should be concerned about the way in which it could actually bolster or ignite actual anti-Semitism by the way in which it's been redefined, and then how that's been forced upon essentially policymakers of various nations to utilize that particular definition. And I think, that's sort of karmic, a potential sort of, metaphorically speaking, karmic consequence, if you will, of these actions, and hiding behind both the Holocaust and subsequently anti-Semitism, and the way in which they, find equivalencies all the time with the suffering and identity, the suffering and tragedy of the Holocaust, combined then with the terminology of the anti-Semitism and the false equivalency with Zionism and the state of Israel and the Jewish plight and the diaspora and all of these things, you know, creates a situation where they're so clouded by their own prejudice and ideological bias that they may not realize that all this is actually doing is fueling the seed, all this genocide, all these lies, this intense propaganda, this intense sort of propagandizing, not just or to other nations, but their own citizenry, you know, and, you know, what the effect this might have in a sort of like a rebound or retaliatory effort. I mean, they should be very careful in regards to, you know, actually creating the conditions that will stoke real and tragic forms of anti-Semitism across the world because of the continued tragedy of what's being committed in Israel, in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to summarize the whole thing, it's like they're crashing the Streisand effect into Stockholm syndrome, and the whole world is getting to learn a whole lot of history starting on 10/7. Hamas didn't mean to start teaching history lessons, and they didn't. Israel started teaching history lessons to the world very clearly, mask off. Here's what the agenda always has
That
been.
might have been their strategy from the get-go.
In America, to get Israeli support, you have to tell us two-state solutions in the works. These people will have their rights someday. You will hear, if it's not in tonight's episode, we'll have it next week. Bibi announced there's no two-state solution. And we've already played those clips for months.
Yeah, they're trying to placate the progressive and liberal base of Biden. They're now arguing they have this plan that's a two-state solution, that they have to, you know, Israel needs to back off and all this sort of nonsense. This is during the election season, so they're placating to that progressive base.
Yeah.
That I think Crystal or Sagar or someone alluded to earlier, which is an apt recognition. It's because that is what is going on.
And as soon as Elon did that whole river to the sea thing back in the day, saying you can't say that because it means genocide against Israel, we had to point out the Likud Charter 1977, the first two lines specifies from the river to the sea, but, you know, it's not Palestine will be free. It's there will be no Palestinians and will only be Israelis. That's their plan. They didn't have a snappy rhyme like Jay-Z, you know, or somebody might put it together. I did find that that tweet from earlier. It is relevant, so I'm going to find it here in the thread, and I'm going to click it open for you, even though I've already had the scroll. It was the Jay-Z and Che Guevara. Because, you know, communism. Oh, no, I missed it. It's all right. That's all right.
Is he big pimping?
When we're getting it like 4 o'clock in the morning-ish, if I lose a tweet that we were supposed to find, not a big deal. All right, so we do have a next media block, and it will be the final one in this topic for this evening. So this one is titled Bibi Bombs Rafah. It's not such a party if you're in Rafah. And again, some of these clips not going to be easy to see, but the fact that they don't want you to see these clips is all the reason to play them and for you to take a few minutes to see them. All right, let's go into this, and then maybe we'll get to the Lolly story.
So guys, while we were watching the Super Bowl last night, Israel began bombing Rafah crossing. That is the place where over 1 million Palestinians have been displaced to, just right there at the bottom of the Gaza Strip. And you can see some of the aftermath of those strikes as people were waking up in the morning. You can see the grief and the horror of those who have been struck, children who have been injured among those who were bombed. And this was something that people have been fearing for a while. Not that Rafah has been a safe place during this